Long and athletic safety that unfortunately had his 2024 season cut way too short to only 2 games because of a partially torn ACL injury, which I unfortunately know all too well about. This player brings an energizing play style to the table, and that is Kevin Winston Jr. So let's get right into it. So today we're going to be diving into Kevin Winston Jr., safety out of Penn State, a 3-year junior. He's only 21 years old right now. That truly feels like a prospect that a team is going to want to get their hands on and just truly mold into what vision they have for this piece. At just over 6'1.5", 208 pounds, is an absolutely incredible physical build with a lot of athleticism traits that are brought to the table in terms of fluidity, in terms of flexibility and coverage, and also just an aggressive play style a lot of teams are going to want to get their hands on. Now, I truly believe Kevin Winston Jr. is best fit to be a strong safety, more an aggressive style safety that I would like to use as a blitzer on aggressive style safety looks. Quarters coverage where I can have him step down and be aggressive on a cover 4 side, maybe on the back side of a cover 6, or a cover 1 robber look where I can roll him down into the box and let him kind of work his way downhill as a coverage piece, or even in zone coverage like cover 3 looks where he was constantly used at Penn State as a buzz player in cover 3 positions. They also utilized inverted looks so he could align as a 2-deep safety, roll down into a cornerback role. This is the type of player right now that I think brings the skill set to eventually help you a lot more. Single eye safety that can cover the entire field, work sideline to sideline because he brings that range to the table. But right now I think instinctually speaking and in terms of ball skills, I don't think that's where he'd make his biggest impact right away. So this is truly an upside piece. We don't know what it's going to look like coming back from an ACL injury. That is a major injury, but I'm hoping for his sake and also understanding the pain of that kind of injury that he's able to get back, return to full form, and that he's going to look like the player before that injury took place. For today's video, most of the film is going to be coming from 2023, and because of that, you're going to have to look for the number 21, and then also the 2024 film, which is very shortened, is going to be wearing the number 2 as he switched his number heading into this past season. So let's get right into Kevin Winston Jr. We'll start with his 3-level ability because I think he brings a good 3-level ability with tons of upside here. As mentioned, I think that he could bring a really deep third element to his game that could be a lot more effective at the next level as that area continues to develop. But where I like him now the most is working his way downhill. He brings an immediate half-turn ability to create depth, which is fantastic. That opens up his range. It opens up the fluidity in his game to get into half-turn, create a lot of depth. You'll see this in his pedal as well. We talked about this for some off-ball backers. He brings that as a safety to cover a lot of ground, which is very useful when you're talking about playing the deeper alignments of coverage. Body control to his entry point. Specifically, you'll see this as a tackler. You'll see it in the open field as a tackler. You also see this in coverage as well. The ability to work down through routes, to pass off routes, is going to come back to the body control that he brings to the table. So right now, I think instinctually there may be some things missing to be more of a playmaker. He truly shows that ability to work through routes and stems back to the body control that he brings. He also has a really nice T-step that some cornerbacks will use at the top of their drop as their plant and drive ability and flexibility to do that, but that is something that Kevin Winston Jr. has flashed the ability to utilize is a T-step, and that allows him to quickly convert from pedal to plant and drive and get back downfield step. I don't think he always uses that, and I think you'll see it in his footwork where it tends to get way too much gather steps at the top for the plant and drive, but he does show that he's capable of implementing that like a cornerback would. He does, however, have a very aggressive and over-aggressive mindset to the game, which in a lot of ways makes him play a lot faster in terms of his pursuit angles, especially when in the box. I love it, but from a top-down perspective, when he is a single high deep safety, those over-aggressive angles that can absolutely get him into trouble, whether that's not only allowing someone to get past him as the deepest defender, but it's also just kind of minimizes cutback opportunities, the way that he attacks and approaches blockers. He can allow himself to get kind of sealed out of plays. That is a true issue right now, is just some of the over-aggression that he plays with in his ankles. There's obviously good and bad that stems from that, but like we saw against Michigan, it turned into a lot more bad than good specifically. Let's bring some lean to the game, some fluidity there where he can kind of dip himself under blocks, and for me, I really like that ability to step down and be effective at the line of scrimmage. I think for me, taking on blocks is going to need some work for sure in terms of consistency there, but the aggressive demeanor definitely shows up, the length shows up, and the approach shows up that you would be looking for, and you'll see that more as a blitzer. You look at off coverage assignments, or say you run a quarters assignment, the controlled transitions that he has to open his hips, turn and run, or plant and drive, but also stay under control within that back pedal. And more of those assignments where he can truly work top down, or if it's an aggressive step down underneath in his own coverage, rather than saying like a cover 2 look, he has to worry about the entire half of the field, or a cover 3 where he's working the deep middle third of the field. In those spots, I feel like this shows up a little bit less, and there's just a little bit more pedally footwork to it. He brings length to the table, which is very impactful for passing lanes alone. You'll see that more on level 1 throws, but it also shows up in man coverage. I mean, he's a guy that typically gets matched up one-on-one with tight ends, and we saw against recall, back in 2023, I thought he had a fantastic game, and that length was incredibly impactful. Not only does he bring the athleticism to the table in terms of the burst in the lower body, but also he brings that kind of length, which can be incredibly impactful at the catch point. I like how he puts himself in a really good position early when he's rolling down in coverage, specifically as a buzz safety in zone coverage, or just as a robber in man coverage, specifically where he's rolling into still a zone assignment. I like how he positions himself inside the number 2 receiver, the way that he kind of sets himself so that he can play a little bit of an in-between game between 2 receivers potentially. He gives himself that room to do it. He doesn't always plaster, I think, as well as you would like in some of those spots, but what he does do is he gives himself an opportunity to cover multiple guys at the same time and really kind of expand the amount of zone that he can actually take away. Now, in terms of the football intelligence and instincts, this where right now Winston here has a slightly above average grade, and this is the area that I think it just his play style alone is going to need the most development. It makes sense in terms of just play time. Like, this is going to be an area that has to continue to work. The good thing is that he has a mentality which is aggressive. He doesn't second guess himself very often, so that aggressive nature allows him to set himself up for plays, especially when working downhill. But in terms of making more plays in the back end, taking the football away, that's where this is going to have to come along. He also gets himself into some big trouble here as well. Finding routes early, I think as a single high safety to cover the entire field that has to look into that kind of range, I think that's inconsistent at just finding routes early, so you'll see like in breakers and things break in front of him where he just has a depth that's just not accurate to where the routes are actually going to be, because his eye balance tends to seemingly lean way too heavy towards the quarterback. He also tends to bypass receivers when there's a play action set. The mesh point, he's inconsistent at reading through that. If he's a buzz safety on a cover 3 look and he has to step down into a hook curl zone, you'll see him almost kind of just let receivers roll by him without maybe giving too much attention to that, maybe even to get a hand on the receiver, and that allows for windows to create right behind him. So if it is a play action, it feels very impactful as his eyes get drawn to that very heavily. There is an inconsistency at reading through the mesh point. The positive is that there is an aggressive mentality to his game to just fly around and make plays. For example, if he's in his own coverage assignment underneath, where again, that's where I like him the most, is say there's a single receiver that releases on the play. Maybe the running back stays in, so now there's no longer a threat, and one receiver releases on his side. He'll be aggressive to overlap that zone and almost carry it through the play before passing it off, understanding that he doesn't have an additional threat that he has to worry about. So you'll see that kind of instinctive aggressiveness to kind of overplay something, understanding that I don't have another threat here that I have to deal with, and that allows him to go find ways to make plays beyond kind of where he was just placed in his own coverage assignment. Also has a really good knack for being aware of vertical route depth. He really doesn't tend to let things get behind him very often, especially in a 2-deep look. It's very rare that you feel routes kind of just run past him. Single high, yes, you can peel him out of the play with some of your route development. In terms of 2-deep looks, he does a fantastic job of not letting routes get behind him and almost just seemingly having a sixth sense that something is getting vertical over top. Maybe he could be a little bit too protective in that sense, but I think it speaks back to the peripheral vision that he plays with, and it allows him to always kind of feel like he has an eye on someone that's vertical and constantly keep his body positioned in a spot that he's not letting guys run behind him consistently. This area, to me, I just think there's going to be the most growth that's going to need to take place. That way he could become more of a playmaker. Like, for example, we'll get into this later with the zone coverage. I think that he doesn't anticipate route breaks as often. There's much more of kind of seeing it and letting it happen before he actually jumps to go make a play. And again, that's for me the inconsistency of finding routes specifically early on reps, and then at that point understanding where the depth might be, what the route development might turn into, because he does have a knack for reading through where the quarterback's rollout is and what his drop type is and kind of matching his footwork towards that. So for example, you'll get rollout plays, and this goes into his play speed, which I think is very good, where he kind of mirrors the quarterback on that, and he gets into a very good spot as he just starts to roll with the quarterback and allow himself to kind of cut the field in half. For example, he's an absolute strider that covers a lot of ground. So we talked about that kind of in the pedal and the half turn, but it also happens when working downhill, is him to open up his range, which I think he has great range. I think there's a lot of potential in there in terms of the amount of ground that he can cover, which opens up a lot of coverage versatility, and you'll see that in the way that he kind of strides, even when he's working towards the box, the ability to quickly get into those strides and cover a ton of ground, especially with the aggressive angles that he attached to that as well. He constantly finishes around the football. There is a little bit of delay working in the backfield in terms of finding the football. Again, that goes back to the mesh point a little bit. I think there's a delay at recognizing it. You'll see it within the run scheme as well, where at times it doesn't feel like he's picking up on the run scheme whatsoever, so he just feels like he's hesitant to go anywhere. And he does carry a really good downhill burst. He plays with an urgency about him when working downhill. He has good hip looseness, specifically against run, that allows him to kind of avoid blocks. We talked about some of that dip that he can kind of bend around blocks a little bit as well. Has some real lateral suddenness. This is the burst that he brings in his lower body. It'll definitely show up in man coverage. There is a suddenness to his game. So not only is he constantly balanced, wide base, really good control, but then he also brings that burst, which allows him to show recovery burst. It allows him to catch up with, say, for example, receivers that are running at full speed. He can kind of immediately work himself into the play. He brings that lateral suddenness process also into his game. So when he's stepping down into the box, he's balanced. Here comes an oncoming blocker. It's immediately sidestep. I'm into the backfield. He brings that kind of urgency and suddenness to his game, decisiveness to his game. It definitely stems well for a blitzer. It can lead to bad because he may pass off something that he wasn't supposed to and he just kind of let it go because he made up his mind. But the positive is you won't get a lot of second guessing. And as a downhill safety, typically that's better than the other way around. You don't want guys that are hesitant consistently. And every time he's downhill, he feels like he's way less hesitant than he is at single high or when he has to even sometimes two deep looks when he just has to play a little bit deeper on the play and he has to kind of let things develop. Straight up, great long speed. Like he can cover a lot of ground. He has that kind of range. He has great long speed. His underneath zone aggression, I think, is fantastic. You'll see it on screens, for example. I love the aggression that he plays with where he'll shoot the slot on the play, trying to set up a bubble screen. He has that aggressive mindset towards him. Again, that can get to some trouble, but as an underneath defender, it's very impactful, and we saw that with Penn State in 2023 specifically when they would get to third down situations, they go to their sub packages, he would step down as kind of their nickel defensive back, and they put an extra safety on the field. Rather than leaving him in a deep safety alignment, they let him step down into the box and play that way where he seemingly is his most comfortable. It is immediate impact in the NFL. If he doesn't come in and start for somebody, he could absolutely be more of a third down piece for you defensively because of some of the coverage aspect that he does bring. Explosive burst when balanced. I think his footwork can be very inconsistent as of now. There's upside. You see the T-step, but it can be inconsistent for sure. It tends to lose a little bit of control. There's way too much of a gather. Underneath zone player or an aggressive half-field player, depending on the coverage drop, specifically like quarters, where he can kind of settle himself down. There's an early read to find what the receiver is, and he does a fantastic job of kind of understanding his assignment. I have a single side receiver like I touched on earlier. Not only if like, okay, he's the only guy, let me just go focus here, but he understands his assignment responsibility. He'll find that responsibility early, and then immediately he can kind of work through it. But then he always seems to have tabs on it. So if he has a responsibility, you'll see this in cover 2 as well, where it's like, how did he even know that was there? Where if he has a vertical route going on the outside, he will make tabs on it early, but then you'll see him as the play develops, not even watching over there, but he seems to still have a knack to know that's getting vertical. He takes note of where guys are early, and he seems to have a pretty good presence about him of understanding where they are as the play develops. As man coverage, I think he's a good man coverage piece. I would have liked to see more from this area, but I think there's actually even more upside within his game, typically because of the length and the athleticism that he brings. I think there's tons of fluidity here as well. My biggest knocks to man coverage weren't really the traits, it was more so the way that he handled it, and that could go more to the instincts and FBI aspect. There is inconsistent discipline and man coverage, and I think, again, his eyes tend to kind of just float. That leads to problems. Guys get behind him, so there's lack of discipline. You see it at times in the red zone where it's just like, okay, play fake, especially for like the 2-yard line, you get a goal line play action. He may just chase the running back or chase the ball, and then he lets someone just run right past him on a coverage assignment, and he picks up the wrong person. Things like that will happen. Now, the aggressive nature is massive here because he closes so much ground so quickly that beneath routes, if you have to pick up a beneath route, when he picks it up properly, he shuts things down, right? If you have a motion that shifts the assignment, now he's got the tight end runs beneath route, he can shut that down immediately. That aggressive nature that he brings, there's just inconsistency right now in his discipline that gets attached alongside of it, where he can get a little bit sidetracked seemingly in man coverage. He has a knack of getting a little bit flat-footed. I love the wide base, but I don't feel like his feet pop enough. They get a little bit flat, and I think the problem with this flat-footedness is that in terms of just being reactive and anything, and his feet are not moving, so as a faster tight end has a vertical push that's aggressive, he can fall behind pretty immediately. Now, he chose to burst to get back into the play, and he doesn't grab as much as he'll get contact. The problem is he just puts himself in bad positions because he doesn't always feel ready for a route break. He doesn't always feel prepared for the route break to take place when he's a little bit more of a tight quarter situation. If it's off man, he can kind of read through, eye balance, plant, and drive, that's different. But if he's like in your hip of a tight end, that keeping his footwork ready when he's met at the route break and he's like on top of the receiver, at that point, I think that's where you get more inconsistency right now within his footwork. He needs to keep his footwork ready. He also kind of tends to play a little bit upright, and that can lead to issues as well within the sync of his route, which again, as these route breaks gets a little bit tighter, you get better tight ends, for example, he's matches up with, or a slot receiver, for example. That's where playing a little more upright, being flat-footed, kind of wide in your base, that can lead to problems within those transitions, and that can allow him to fall behind. And even here, I love the way that he matches the press off the line of scrimmage. He has kind of this 2-footed hop into his fall step, but he gets in the hip and he tries to track and trace. The problem becomes you can see how upright it is. So when he sinks down, he loses a lot of space here. The footwork kind of gets thrown off. And I think this is what shows up within his gather too, is he's not as low to the ground. It's not as natural with the bend. That's why the T-step helps. And that's something that will happen, is he'll absolutely fall behind. He'll fall into trail positions way too often in the coverage. A little bit less proactive, especially when he's kind of up on a receiver, rather than, again, playing top down. Positive is again, there's a decisiveness when it's in his game, and you'll see that when he's passing off man coverage responsibilities. He may not maybe make the right decision, but there's a decisiveness to do it, and that can help you in short yardage situations. There's also kind of the length which plays in. He has a knack for undercutting routes. I think that's one of the biggest strength to his ball skills. He didn't make a lot of plays on the football from what I've seen, and production-wise, historically, he doesn't have a ton. He has like 5 pass breakups and interception from a year ago, but you do see that there is kind of a feel to like undercut routes and try to utilize that length and maximize his length the best that he can. I think the problem there is at the catch point, he can leave too much airspace, and we have seen that. We've seen him attack the ball rather than also play man then ball. There can be kind of an off balance where it's more so leaning attack ball, and that allows the receiver where if he misses the ball, he allows him to just make a play. I think he needs to be a little bit better at playing both receiver and ball, and maybe focusing receiver first to just make sure he doesn't make the grab. Positive is he wins really early. He positions himself very early. There's a proactiveness there, especially in off-man coverage. He steps himself down. He has a little bit of that hip swivel to kind of position himself in off-man, create positive angles for himself. And then again, also that footwork is so balanced that the transitions are typically very fluid when he has to open, turn, and run. Now, in terms of zone coverage, I also think that he's good in this category as of now. I don't love him in the deep zone alignments as often. I like him to more of the aggressive, stepping down assignments, cover 3, cover 4. I like him more there. It was a cover 4 palms. Like, I'd like him there. I don't like him as much right now in a cover 2 man setting or as a cover 1 setting as a single high safety. I don't like him as much there right now, but what I do like is that, again, he opens up with the quarterback's drop. He does a really good job of kind of mirroring through that. Turn burst, which is incredibly important for zone coverage where, you know, if you're working down, can you open up and turn around with the guy in the seam, right? Can you do that from a 2-deep alignment where, hey, it's a palms coverage, right? There's the outbreaking route, vertical went out wide. Can you open yourself up and transition and get there, right? Do you need to stay on top of it or can you get there from an even alignment? He brings that kind of burst where typically he doesn't have to be incredibly proactive to get back into those spots. For one, he tends to give a little bit too much space. Again, it's kind of a single high alignment, just playing over top. He gives too much space. You'll see this in 2-man 2. He tends to give up too much ground to actually make a play on the football. I don't think there's enough anticipation or expectation there to just go make a play. He kind of lets it happen and then he reacts to it. And I think that's a problem. He needs to be a little bit more like, okay, I think this is what the route's developing into. I'm just going to go jump this and make a play. Like how he works through crossing routes. You'll see it in like mesh concept where he kind of just works through those situations. It's huge in red zone because the field condenses and he can step down and play a little more aggressive, and you'll see that it's in his nature to play a little bit more aggressive as a style, and he has that body control to kind of sift through the traffic and also maintain some discipline there, not to just carry something, but also anticipate. He can kind of feel routes coming, pass them off. There's a decisiveness. Like his cover 2 eye balance, it tends to be much more active, and he tends to, again, kind of get tabs on receivers during the play. Recovery burst and recovery acceleration to his game, which can allow him to recover into plays, which is massive from the safety position, which again opens up his range. For example, you're going to see Kevin Winston roll down here over the slot receiver, and you get to see some of the swivel in his hips in this off coverage to kind of mirror over top, but you do notice some of the delay in terms of the transitions because he's just a little bit more upright. He doesn't play as low, which is something you may just have to deal with. However, you also see that it just feels like he takes a little bit too long to pass this route off. Speaking to that kind of discipline, if he gets in the trail positions, he probably needs to be more disciplined there as well to track the receiver rather than looking back for the football, or so kind of just leaning really heavy balance towards the quarterback, which can kind of take away passing windows. He does a nice job of setting it in between so he could cover a lot of space. Guys just find small windows against you because you're not taking as much focus to where the receivers are actually at in your zone specifically. Pass off zone responsibilities a little bit quicker as well, specifically zone coverage responsibilities. I do like how when he's working top down and more aggressive zone coverage assignments, he does tend to have a patience to him to work through it, right? He doesn't see the first guy and just take off with it. There's a patience to allow it to kind of set itself up. Comes to the physicality he brings, this is where he's great. I think this is where teams are going to love him. The one knock that I have here as a tackler is he can tend to lose a little bit of force on tackles just by the way that he enters, kind of throwing himself a little bit, losing a little bit of real creative force that he could have. He also tackles a little bit high. Couple things on a play like this. First off, notice the T-step at the top of the drop. You're going to see it here on the bottom of the screen. But then as he approaches, the aggressive angles can lead to kind of misplacing, so then he gets high. But I also do love the fact that he attacks the ball. He has the right mindset as an attacker. So you don't get as many of those waist hits which really knock guys back. It's a little bit too high at times that he can kind of get up on his shoulder, and he can kind of slide off guys, lose a lot of force that he creates. But mentality-wise, he definitely attacks with force, that's for sure. He's fearless. He sells out. You'll see it between the tackle box. I love where the patience comes in here because because even between the tackles, he's not like closing his eyes and just diving into the pile. He will dive into the pile, but he still breaks himself down to kind of settle himself into the tackle attempts. Attacks tight end blocks, which I love. Again, technically speaking, I think the shed is going to need some work, but he does attack blocks, which is a great start. He has the hips to kind of work himself over block. Again, he brings a lot of tackling radius as well within his length, within the burst that he does carry, which is fantastic. Again, he can play a little bit too tall, and that can allow guys to slip past him and take him a second to kind of drop his weight. He needs to get himself lower, but he does play pretty wide, and he does do a nice job of breaking himself down when the run has a second to set up. On the fly, maybe at times he doesn't set himself down as well, and he kind of throws himself a little bit more, but in terms of in a crowd, in an alley, he does break himself down, and I think he thrives in an alley because of that aggressive, and he wants to hit somebody, so that's where he gets to thrive because it's much better technique. His finish through the ball when he's working in an alley specifically, there's a real finish to his tackling technique, which does a relatively good job of disallowing leakage unless he just totally misses the tackle altogether, but if he doesn't, typically doesn't allow too much leakage. Has an ability to set the edge. We've seen this against tight ends because of the way he attacks tight ends, because of the range that he had. As long as the discipline is there, he has that skill set to set an edge. He has the lateral suddenness to do just that. We saw a play where he worked through a stiff arm, which was fantastic, continued to work, continued to keep his feet moving, which showed the real tackling technique upside that he truly had. Notes on blitzing here for me. I like the idea of him as a blitzer. I would have liked to see more as a blitzer. I think he has the elusiveness, which leads to good upside. He has good elusiveness. He has good foot quickness as well at the line of scrimmage, which can make him a little bit nifty. And his entry is a very aggressive entry. He attacks running backs rather than just trying to dip and work around them. So I don't think he's like the loosest pass rusher, and I don't know that he has many pass rush moves to get to that are going to lead to much there, but he definitely has the mentality for it. He has the length for it. He can get into passing lanes, and there's an urgency about his game to attack blockers. Overall, I think that Kevin Winston Jr. is going to be a little bit lower in terms of my critical factors, and I think that when you talk about some of the does by his position, there's a couple of areas, like for example the man and zone coverage, that I think could improve. Depending on the spot that you put him in, there could lead to more consistency. If it's a third down sub package safety, he would be fantastic in that role. And then I think in man coverage, well, I think he's good now. I think there's little things that he can improve from a discipline perspective to just move that ceiling a lot higher, and I think he has a higher ceiling. I don't know that it'll be the best coverage safety in man, but I think he could definitely press that ceiling up a little bit. He plays very fast, and he definitely has the athleticism and the skill set to play and be effective at all three levels. He's just more effective to me right now, level 1 and level 2, with level 3 being much more of a work in progress, and even level 2 to some points just leaving too many windows in coverage specifically. I like him more as a downhill safety. I don't know what he's going to look like coming off of this injury. Hopefully he looks good. Ended up giving him a 6.3 grade. Kevin Winston Jr. is a young prospect. There's a lot of upside. There's not a lot of experience, and I think that's going to excite some teams. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.